A handful of coins spilled across a checkout counter. They rolled in every direction. One quarter dropped to the floor and rang against the tile. Then a dime. Then a nickel. A trembling hand reached down to chase them. Behind her, the line went quiet. A teenager with a basket stepped back without a word. The young cashier waited, not moving, not speaking. The hand came back up, holding 3 small coins. They were placed onto the pile with the others. Then the counting started. Slowly, 1 coin at a time. Her name was Ruth, 87 years old. Standing alone in a small-town grocery store with the last few dollars to her name, trying to buy 1 loaf of bread. What happened in the next 10 minutes inside that store would leave grown men in leather vests wiping their eyes in the parking lot. Stay with me on this one. The store was called Miller's Market, a little family place tucked off the highway in a small town where everyone knew everyone. Ruth had been shopping there for 46 years. She used to come every Saturday morning with her husband Henry, back when Henry was alive. They'd walk the aisles together. He'd carry the basket. She'd find the deals. Henry had been gone now for 11 years. And every year the world had gotten a little more expensive, and Ruth's Social Security check had gotten a little more useless. She didn't drive much anymore. Her old Buick still ran, but barely. Her hands were not what they used to be. Some days she could grip a steering wheel just fine. Other days her fingers shook so hard she couldn't button her own coat. This was a shaking day. But she had needed bread. Ruth lived 3 miles outside of town, in a 1-story house Henry had built himself in 1962. The roof leaked. The porch sagged. The heating bill had eaten almost everything she'd had this month. She'd already cut back to 1 meal a day. She'd already canceled her newspaper. She'd already stopped buying coffee. And Lord, she had loved her morning coffee. But she still needed bread. She had emptied her change jar that morning, counted everything twice on her kitchen table. For $1.37. The bread at Miller's was $4.89. She was short. She knew she was short. But she had thought maybe today, just today, the bread would be on sale. Or maybe she had miscounted. Maybe one of those quarters was actually a 50-cent piece. Maybe. She had walked to the store. 3 miles in the cold. Her knees had hurt the whole way. Now she was at the counter. The young cashier was a girl maybe 19, 20 years old. Pretty. Tired-looking. She had a name tag that read Cassie. Cassie said, very softly, "Ma'am, you're short 52 cents. Ruth nodded. She had known. "I'll just put it back, dear," Ruth said. Her voice was quiet, dignified. She started to pick the loaf up. That was when the sound started. Came from outside. Low at first. A rumble. Then louder still. Like rolling thunder coming up the road. Cassie looked toward the front window. Her eyes went wide. Ruth turned slowly. Out in the parking lot, motorcycle after motorcycle was pulling in. Big ones. Loud ones. Black leather. Long beards. Tattoos on every visible piece of skin. They came in formation, one after another, until the whole parking lot was full and they were spilling out onto the road. Ruth had never been afraid in this store before. Never. But something tightened in her chest now. She gripped the loaf of bread a little tighter and took a step back from the counter. The bell above the door rang. A man came in first. Tall. Broad. The kind of broad that made the door frame look small. He had a salt and pepper beard down to his chest. A bandana tied around his head. A leather vest covered in patches. Behind him came another. Then another. Then 10 more. Then 20. The little store filled up fast. Ruth pressed herself against the side of the counter, holding the loaf of bread in front of her. She did not move. She did not speak. She just watched. The big man with the beard glanced over at her. Just glanced. Then he looked away. He started filling a basket with bottled waters. Behind him, his men spread out through the aisles. Calm, quiet, polite. A few of them said, "Excuse me," as they reached around her for items on the shelves. One of them said, "Ma'am," and tipped his head. Cassie was standing very still behind the register. Ruth's heart was pounding. She wanted to leave, but she couldn't leave without paying. And she couldn't pay because she didn't have enough. She looked down at the bread in her hands. She looked at the 4 crumpled dollar bills and the 37 cents on the counter. She looked at her wedding ring. The little gold band Henry had slipped on her finger in 1958. And she did what she had always done in hard moments. She straightened her back. She lifted her chin. She set the loaf of bread back down on the counter, carefully, the way you'd set down something precious. "I'm sorry, dear," she said to Cassie. "I'll come back another day." Ruth turned to walk away from the counter. That's when a voice stopped her. Deep, low, calm. "Ma'am." Ruth looked back. The big man with the salt and pepper beard was standing there. He had set down his basket of waters on the floor. His vest had a patch on it that read Iron Veterans MC. Below that was a smaller patch. Crossed Rifles. He had soft, dark eyes set deep in a weathered face. "Ma'am," he said again. "You forgot your bread." Ruth shook her head. "No, son. I didn't forget. I just don't have enough today. I'll come back." The man didn't move. He just looked at her. And then, slowly, he reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a worn leather wallet. "How much was she short, miss?" he asked Cassie. Cassie blinked. 52 cents, sir." He pulled out a $20 bill. He set it on the counter. "Ring up the bread. Whatever's left, put it on her tab next time." Ruth's mouth opened. "Oh no. No, please. I can't accept that. I don't take charity." The big man nodded slowly, like he had expected her to say that. "It's not charity, ma'am," he said. "It's bread. A loaf of bread between 2 strangers. That's all. My grandmother used to say nobody should ever walk out of a store without their bread. So I'm honoring my grandmother today. You're not taking from me. You're letting me give. There's a difference." Ruth's eyes filled. She didn't trust herself to speak. The man smiled. Just a little. He had a kind smile, despite all the leather and ink and beard. "Name's Mike," he said. "Most folks call me Big Mike. And you are?" "Ruth," she whispered. "Ruth Whitaker." "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Whitaker." He picked up the loaf of bread. He handed it to her gently, with both hands, the way you'd hand someone a baby. Ruth took it. Her hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you. God bless you." She turned. She walked toward the door. Her legs felt unsteady. She passed between 2 enormous men in leather vests, and they both stepped aside for her. One of them held the door open. He nodded at her as she passed. The cold air hit her face. She made it 10 steps into the parking lot before her eyes spilled over. She stopped. She set the loaf down on the hood of a stranger's parked truck. She took a tissue from her coat pocket. She wiped her eyes carefully. She did not want to be seen crying. She picked up the bread. She walked over to a little wooden bench by the ice machine. She sat down. She rested the bread in her lap. For a long moment, she just breathed. The motorcycles around her sat silent, their engines off, their riders inside. What kindness, she thought. What unexpected kindness in this hard world. She thought about Henry, about how he would have liked that man. He would have shaken his hand. Henry had always said you couldn't judge a man by what he wore. He had worn the wrong uniform once, in a war nobody wanted to remember, and people had treated him badly for it. He had never forgotten it. Ruth opened the plastic bag that held the bread. She pulled out a single slice. She held it up to her face. She breathed in, fresh, warm, the smell of yeast and home and Saturday mornings. She put the slice back. She closed the bag. She thought, now I'll just walk home, and tonight I'll have bread and butter, and tomorrow I'll have toast, and that will be enough. She felt the tightness in her chest begin to loosen. She felt herself smile, just a little. She felt the day starting to be okay. The motorcycles around her sat silent. Their riders were still inside. She thought about waiting until they all left. But it was cold, and she was tired. She decided she'd just rest a moment longer, and then start walking home. It was over. The kindness had happened. She'd carry the memory of it with her. She closed her eyes. The front doors of Miller's Market burst open. Ruth's eyes opened. Big Mike came out first. He was carrying 4 full grocery bags in each hand. Behind him came another biker, also loaded down with bags. Then another. Then another. Then 10 more. Then 20. They kept coming. Ruth sat up straight on the bench. Bag after bag after bag. Big paper bags. Plastic bags. Crates. Cases of water. Cartons of milk. Boxes of cereal. A whole turkey. Bags of flour, sugar, coffee, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. Whole cuts of meat wrapped in butcher paper. The bikers walked, in a slow, organized line, straight toward her. Ruth stood up. Her legs nearly went out from under her. She grabbed the back of the bench to steady herself. What is this? Big Mike stopped in front of her. His arms were full. The men behind him stopped too. The whole parking lot stopped. Mrs. Whitaker, he said gently. We talked it over inside. We were doing a memorial run today. The boys and me. We had some money set aside for lunch in the next town. We took a vote. We don't need lunch. We're going to eat your kindness instead. Ruth shook her head. No, this is too much. I can't. Please, I have a small house. I can't fit. I can't carry. Big Mike just nodded. Where's your car, ma'am? Ruth couldn't answer. She just pointed across the lot. The old Buick. Faded blue. Rust along the bottom. Sitting alone at the back, where she had parked it because she didn't want anyone to see it. Big Mike turned to his men. He didn't even raise his voice. Boys, help the lady to her car. They moved. 2 bikers came forward and took Ruth gently by the elbows. Not pulling, not pushing, just steadying, like they were her own grandsons. They walked her to her car. She unlocked the trunk with shaking hands. The bikers began loading. The trunk filled in less than a minute. Then they started on the back seat. Bags piled up against the windows. Then the passenger floor. Then the passenger seat itself. Still they kept coming. Bikers carrying things from the store. Some of them brought things she had not seen them buy. Toilet paper by the case. Laundry detergent. A heating pad still in its box. 2 pairs of warm winter socks. A heavy wool blanket. Ruth was crying openly now. She couldn't stop. Why? She said. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Big Mike was placing a carton of eggs carefully on the passenger seat. He looked over at her. Ma'am, he said, we know enough. Listen, if you're still with me on this one, if your throat's getting tight too, hit that subscribe button. Stay with the channel. There's more to this story. A lot more. Big Mike closed the back door of the Buick. He brushed his hands off on his jeans. Now, he said, Mrs. Whitaker, we've got one more thing to ask you. And you can say no. You absolutely can. But we'd like to follow you home. Ruth's eyes went wide. Follow me. Home. Yes, ma'am. Why? Big Mike rubbed the back of his neck. He looked, for the first time, a little uncertain, like a man asking permission for something he didn't entirely have the words for. Mrs. Whitaker, when you said in there that you didn't take charity, I believed you, so we're not asking to give you anything else. We're asking to come help. The boys want to look around your place, see if anything needs fixing, anything we can do with our own hands. No money, just work. We've got 200 men with us. Half of us know our way around a hammer. We just want to be useful for an hour or 2. Is that all right with you? Ruth could not speak. She thought of her sagging porch, the leak in the roof, the garbage disposal that hadn't worked in 3 years, the light fixture in the bathroom that hung at a strange angle, The lawn she hadn't been able to mow in 2 summers because the mower was broken and her hands couldn't pull the cord anymore. She thought, if I say yes, 200 strangers will know how I'm living. She thought, I have lived with my own pride for 11 years, and what has it gotten me? She looked up at Big Mike, at his soft, dark eyes set in a weathered face. All right, she whispered. All right, you can follow me home. Big Mike nodded once. He turned to his men. Saddle up, boys. The parking lot exploded into the sound of 200 motorcycles starting at once. The thunder shook the windows of Miller's Market. Through the glass, Cassie the cashier was watching, hands over her mouth, tears running down her face. Ruth got behind the wheel of her old Buick. She started the engine, coughed and caught. She pulled out of the parking lot, and behind her, 200 bikers fell in line. 2 by 2, headlights on, slow and steady, an honor guard rolling through a small town toward an old woman's house. People came out of stores along Main Street to watch. Cars pulled over to let them pass. A man in front of the hardware store took off his hat. Ruth drove the 3 miles home with tears pouring down her face. She had no idea what was about to happen in her front yard, but she was about to find out. Ruth pulled into her driveway. The Buick came to a stop in front of her little gray house. The same house Henry had built 64 years ago. The gutter on the left side of the porch was hanging half off. The front step was rotted clean through in one spot. The lawn was up to her shins. Behind her, 200 motorcycles filled her dirt road. The sound was unbelievable. Felt like the ground itself was shaking. Big Mike pulled up beside her on his big Harley. He cut the engine. He got off slowly, knees stiff, and walked over to her car door. He opened it for her. Mrs. Whitaker, may we? Ruth looked at her house. She nodded. What happened in the next 2 hours, she would tell people about for the rest of her life. It wasn't chaos. It was the opposite of chaos. It was like watching a very practiced army at work. Big Mike walked the property with 3 other men. They pointed at things. They made notes. Within 15 minutes, the bikers had divided themselves into crews. A team of 12 started on the porch. 2 men appeared with toolboxes from a sidecar. A third went into town and came back 20 minutes later with lumber strapped across his bike. Another crew of 15 started on the lawn. 3 of them had brought push mowers in trailers. Others had hand tools. They worked like a beehive. A third crew, the smallest, just 6 men, went up onto the roof. Ruth winced when she saw them climbing. But they moved like they had done it 1,000 times. They patched the leak over her bedroom. Then they patched 2 other spots she hadn't even known were leaking. Inside the house, 3 older bikers sat with Ruth at her kitchen table. They were the ones too old or too injured to climb on roofs and swing hammers. One of them had an oxygen tank in a backpack. They drank her tea, which she had insisted on making. She had nothing else to offer. Mrs. Whitaker, said the oldest one. His name was Tom. He had a gray ponytail and a Vietnam veteran patch on his vest. Mike said you might have lost a husband? Ruth nodded. 11 years. My Henry. He served. She got up slowly from the table. She walked into the front room. She came back with a framed photograph. Henry, 19 years old, in uniform, a jungle behind him, a rifle slung over his shoulder. A young man's face, half scared, half trying to look brave. The old biker took the picture in both hands. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at Ruth, and his eyes were wet. Where? He asked. Where was he? Ruth told him. Tom closed his eyes. I was there too. 3 miles south of where he was. Same year. We might have passed each other. Ruth sat down hard in her chair. Tom set the photograph on the table. He laid one big, scarred hand flat on top of it. Like a blessing, like a goodbye. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, we were writing today for our brothers. The ones who didn't make it home. The ones we lost over there. The The ones we lost since. He paused. He took a breath. Your Henry was one of ours. We didn't know it when we walked into that store. But he was. We don't leave family hungry. Not ever. Ruth couldn't speak. Outside, the sound of hammers. The sound of mowers. The sound of men working hard. The sound of laughter, every now and then. Real laughter. Not cruel. Tom reached into his vest. He pulled out an envelope. It was thick. We took up a collection, he said. The boys passed a hat in the parking lot before we came out. 200 men. Some put in $5. Some put in 500. We don't ask. We don't count while we're collecting. Mike counted in the truck on the way over. He set the envelope on the table. Ruth stared at it. We don't take charity, she whispered, by reflex. Tom smiled. It's not charity, ma'am. It's a debt. Owed to your husband. Long overdue. We're just the ones delivering it. Ruth's hand shook as she picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. She just held it. How much? She whispered. $6,470, Tom said. Cash. She stared at him. The number didn't seem real. That's enough to fix my heating. That's more than enough. That's enough for a lot of things, ma'am. The boys talked. There's a fund. We've got a fund for situations like this. Once a year we pick someone. This year we picked you. So whatever this doesn't cover, you call this number, and we figure it out. You understand me? He slid a card across the table. A simple white card. A name. A phone number. Ruth started to cry then. Really cry. The kind of crying she had not done since Henry's funeral. The kind that comes from somewhere very deep, and once it starts, it has to finish. Tom didn't move. He didn't try to stop her. He just sat with her. He kept one hand flat on Henry's photograph. The other hand he placed gently on top of Ruth's hand. His fingers were thick and rough and warm. The other two bikers at the table sat quietly too. One of them had his own tears running down into his beard. None of them spoke for a long time. Outside, the work continued. Inside, 3 old men sat with a widow and let her cry. It was the kindest moment of Ruth Whitaker's life. By the time the sun started going down, the work was finished. The porch was rebuilt. New boards. New railings. Painted gray to match the house. The lawn was mowed and edged. The gutter was reattached. The roof was patched. The garbage disposal worked. The bathroom light fixture hung straight. Inside the kitchen, the cabinets were full. The pantry was full. The fridge was full. The freezer was full. There was meat enough for a year. Coffee for 6 months. Toilet paper stacked higher than she was tall. In the front yard, 200 men stood in a loose circle, helmets in their hands. Big Mike stepped forward. Ruth stood on her new porch. Her hands were folded in front of her. She had stopped crying an hour ago and started again twice since. Mrs. Whitaker, Big Mike said, we got to head out. We've got 200 miles to make before dark. Ruth nodded. She didn't trust her voice. But before we go, Big Mike said, I wanted to say something. To you. From all of us. He took off his bandana. He held it in his hands. The other men stood very still. My grandmother raised me, Big Mike said. After my parents passed. She raised 6 kids on a widow's pension. And every Saturday morning, no matter what, she'd buy a loaf of bread. White bread. Sliced. The cheap kind. She'd say a loaf of bread is the cheapest miracle in the world. Because it'll keep you alive a whole week if you have to stretch it. He swallowed. My grandmother died when I was 19. I joined the Corps a month later. I've been chasing trouble ever since. But every time I see an old woman counting change at a grocery store, I see my grandmother. Every single time. And today I saw my grandmother in you, ma'am. So thank you. For letting us help. For letting us be useful. For honoring our brothers by letting us honor you. Ruth was crying again. She didn't fight it this time. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you all. I will never forget. I will never forget any of you, as long as I live. Big Mike nodded. He turned to his men. Boys! 200 men, one after another, came up the walk to the porch. Each one shook Ruth's hand. Some kissed it. Some hugged her very gently. Some just touched her shoulder. A few of them pressed business cards into her palm. Phone numbers. Addresses. Any time, ma'am. If you need anything. Day or night. It took 20 minutes for all of them to come through. Then they got on their bikes. 200 engines started. The sound rolled across the field behind her house. They pulled out 2 by 2, just as they had come. Big Mike was the last to leave. He paused at the end of her driveway. He raised one hand. Ruth raised hers back. And then he was gone. The road went quiet. Ruth stood on her new porch as the sun went down. She walked inside her house slowly. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat at her kitchen table. On the table still was the envelope, the photograph of Henry, the little white card with the phone number. She opened the envelope. She counted the money just to be sure. $6,470. Just like he had said. She held one of the bills up to the light. She didn't know why. Maybe just to make sure it was real. It was real. She set the money down. She picked up the photograph of Henry. She looked at his young face for a long time. You wouldn't believe it, Henry, she whispered. You just wouldn't believe what happened today. Then she made herself a slice of toast with butter from the loaf of bread Big Mike had paid for. She ate it slowly, sitting at her own kitchen table, in her own warm house, surrounded by enough food to last her through any winter. That should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. A week later, a card showed up in the mail. Just a simple thinking of you card, signed by 12 of the bikers. It came with a phone number and an offer to drive her to her doctor's appointment that month. A month after that, 3 of them showed up to plow her driveway after the first snow. A month after that, 2 more came by to shovel her walkway and bring her firewood. By spring, they were coming once a month just to check in. They brought groceries. They brought their kids. Their kids called her Grandma Ruth. She wasn't alone anymore. And on the morning of her 88th birthday, she walked out to her front porch. There was a bouquet of flowers there, white daisies, her favorite, and underneath them a small envelope. Inside the envelope was a card that read, simply, "From your boys. Happy birthday, Mrs. Whitaker. Henry would be proud." Ruth held that card to her chest. She thought about that day at Miller's Market, about a handful of coins spilled across a counter, about a stranger who had looked at her and seen his grandmother, about how the smallest moment, the moment when she had been most ashamed and most alone, had turned into the moment that gave her back her family. She had walked into that store with $4.37. She had walked out with 200 sons. And every Saturday morning, for the rest of her life, she bought a loaf of bread, white, sliced, the cheap kind, the cheapest miracle in the world.